Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. I'm Sophia. So today I thought we'd do a quick needle 101. It is confusing when you see, especially if you go into a haberdashery and there's just a wall of different needles, and I totally understand if you're a beginner that it can be quite overwhelming. And also I'm here to say you do need to change your needle. A lot of beginners don't actually realise that the needle is probably the most important component to your sewing machine, and if your sewing starts to look really messy and you've been using your machine a lot, it's probably the fact that the needle was blunt and not your threading of the machine. We do actually have a lot of people bringing their machines in thinking that they're broken, only to find out that they just haven't changed their needle in 10 years. And we're so surprised that they've even managed to sew anything with a blunt needle that's been sewn for 10 years. So, I mean, take us to the needle that lasted that long. But you do need to change your needle. You don't need to change it as often as a lot of people say. A lot of old school sewing tutors will say you need to change it every single project. I personally think that is a bit excessive and a waste of needles, but I would definitely change the needle to what I'm doing. So I'm going to show you what I use, just in case it helps you in the future. I've got a little thing that I made. I'm just going to grab it now. Okay, so here is my random little thing that I have next to my sewing table. I basically store my needles in these little felt pockets. I've got more here. And then what I do is if I swap the type of needle, I just attach it to the front of the felt pocket, and then I know that those are other embroidery needles, or I know that those are other top stitch needles. So I can just keep them like that and keep track of them, because some brands mark them with colours and some brands don't. So just to save you confusion and wasting your needles, if I've only used one of my embroidery needles for my free motion once, and then I've gone to make a pair of jeans and I've put a jeans needle in there, I don't want to just waste that whole embroidery needle, so I'm going to put it back on here and then I can get it out again when I next do my free motion. So that's just a little thing that I use. There are pin cushion versions that I've seen people do, but that's how I keep track of everything, just in case it helps you. So needle types, you've got universal is probably your main one. Does what it says on the tin, universal needles, for a wider variety of projects. The other sort of most popular ones are jersey needles or ballpoint needles. They are the same thing. Ballpoint and jersey needles are the same thing. But there are some more expensive jersey needles, or you might find some say super stretch. Now all that means is if you've got, I'm just going to hold a round needle here. This is the wider bit at the top that attaches into your machine. I don't know if you can see that. Okay, so this is the widest bit of the needle that goes into your machine, and there's the eye of the needle where you thread your thread through. So all of them have the same sort of bit at the top to attach into your machine, and they always have a flat back, so you can only put them in one way. This is a universal needle, but on a ballpoint needle, this point here is just rounded. So instead of making a hole in your jersey fabric, it actually goes between the jersey fibres or the knit fibres of that fabric, so that it doesn't leave holes. On a super stretch needle, essentially the bottom part here is just slightly longer, so it gives your bobbin thread more chance to hook through. So imagine this is going down through your knit fabric. If it was short, the bobbin thread has only got to sort of hook through there. If it's a bit longer, it has more chance to sort of hook through there, and then come back up. So essentially a super stretch needle is just a fancy jersey or ballpoint needle, but I would recommend it for things like viscose jersey, like thin slinky jerseys, swimsuit fabrics, lingerie fabrics, things that are a bit more delicate, or have more movement. You'll want a super stretch needle. Now, talking of differences between other needles, so you've got your universal normal, you've got your ballpoint jersey stretch needles that are all ballpoint and with a rounded tip. You've got things like embroidery needles, anti-glue needles, things like that. They're all just fancy versions of universal needles that might have a different coating or a slightly different shape. to help you with your different projects. So, I mean, I wouldn't worry about those unless you were doing it sort of like professionally. You then also have leather needles. Now, leather needles on the eye of the needle have a little blade. So it actually cuts a hole as you sew through it. So it's not just pushing a point through, it's got like a little blade that sort of cuts it out as it goes through. It can sew through thin leathers on a domestic machine. But also leather needles can be useful if you're sewing through loads of really heavy duty fabric. So don't just think it's leather. Think of that as, I need something that's going to penetrate really thick. So if you're doing like duck canvas or 3 layers of cotton canvas, you might need something like that to cut through all the layers. Just a step down from that is a denim or jeans needle. They are super strong, again with a slightly different shaped point, so they can cut through the fabric a bit better. And they're a bit more heavy duty, so they can, and some of them have a bigger eye as well, so you can put top stitch thread through them really, really easily. So those is what jeans and denim needles are. They're just like a slightly less bladed version of a leather needle. You also have sharps needles. Now, sharps needles are really thin, really small needles with a very sharp point, and they are for your thin viscoses, silks, organzas, things that are really delicate. You would use a sharps needle for. So again, you can use sharps needles for lingerie if you're doing like lace parts, but remember, if it's got jersey or stretch thing underneath, you might not want to use it. But I would experiment with the finish of it. So if your sharps needle, although it's a smaller point, it might still leave holes, whereas your ballpoint needle won't. So it might just be an experiment with the different types of needles. In my opinion, quilting and top stitch needles are again just your slightly fancier versions of your universal needles. Top stitch needles, again like denim, normally have a bigger eye, so you can get thicker threads through them. So if you are struggling with things like that, then you can use top stitch needles. Quilting needles, embroidery needles, they're all very, very similar. And the last needles I want to talk about are overlock needles. On your overlocker, if you do have an overlocker, it should have a sticker on it that tells you the size of the needle that overlocker should have in it. Stick to those needles. Try and get the best quality that you can. Overlockers are, you know, fast, heavy duty machines that need a very strong needle. Don't be tempted to put normal machine needles. All you're going to do is snap them and end up either having to find a shard of needle in your overlocker, or it's going to get stuck in what you're working on. Stick to the same size that they recommend, and don't sway from that. So I'm just going to show you some different needle packets now. I've got some overlocker needles here of varying sizes, and I've got some jeans needles here of the same size. So numbers. So you might see on your needle packets varying numbers at the bottom. You can get mixed packets or sometimes the same size packets. So these ones are varying sizes. Now, they will tell you the size of the actual needle itself. So here is another one, a jeans needle, and they are all the same size. They're all 100s. And on these, I've got a mix of 80s and 90s. Yeah, 80s and 90s. I always look at the 80s and 90s, not the smaller numbers. It doesn't matter, but those are the ones that I sort of remember what I'm doing with. So the easiest way to remember what size needle you need is the smaller the number, the thinner the fabric. The larger the number, the thicker the fabric. So for overlocker needles, you'll normally find that they are all sort of in the 90-14 range, whereas like sharps needles might be in the 60 range. So just remember, the smaller the number, the thinner the fabric, the larger the number, thicker the fabric. So if you've got a assorted packet of needles, say you've got some universal needles and there are 3 different sizes. So if I was sewing denim, I would probably use a size 100 needle. If I was sewing quilting cottons, I'd probably use an 80 or a 90. And then if I was using thin viscose, I might use a 70. So yeah, change your needle and your needle type and needle size to whatever you're working on. One thing to always note is It doesn't really matter if you've forgotten the size of a needle in your machine. One tip that I always do in the sewing school, if we've changed the needle in the machine, is we write down the needle and the size, and we put it on a little piece of masking tape, and we just stick it to the front of the machine, so that the next person who sits down knows that the needle currently in that machine is sharps 60, so that they then don't go and put through denim and then it snaps instantly. So that's a tip. If you come away from your sewing machine quite a lot, or you go between projects, that's another little tip to keep an eye on what you're actually using, because it's very hard to tell once the needle's in there of which one it is. Sometimes they have like tiny numbers etched into them, but unless you have a really powerful magnifying glass, you're not going to read those easily. So yeah, I hope that was useful. I'm sorry if I rushed a few bits, but I just wanted to give like a really quick 101 of different needle types and sizes, just so that it's less confusing. If you have any questions for me, please pop them below and I will do my very best to answer them. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe. I forget to say that at the end of my videos, but don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on my videos, and I will see you next week for another video. Happy handmade, everyone.